smart contracting, navigating the pricing structures for maximum value. How do you do that? We already covered several of the other topics, from vendor selection to pre-position contracts to smart dollars and cents to the mandates, the differences, the directions of where we're going. And if you missed any of that and you're looking for any more information, please feel free. In the upper right-hand portion of your section, you'll find the Q&A section. Just click on that. You'll see our contact information, or wait until the end and we'd be more than glad to give it to you. And you could walk away with any of the other data and we could send it over to you if you missed any of those great sessions. A lot of ground was covered in preparation for today. So let's jump into today. As we said, typical housekeeping rules in effect. If you joined us for the last 5 sessions, you know what they are. Q&A feature is going to be the Q&A feature. That's the highlighted one on your screen right there in the upper right-hand corner. That's where you're going to place your questions, not in the chat feature. We're not utilizing the chat feature. If you have a need to raise your hand, please just put on that orange box that you see highlighted there, and we'll get any questions you have answered. This is the last one in the series, so please let's jump in and get right going. So the timeline for states to be reimbursed. Don, could you go over this? We went over this extensively in some of the prior ones. We're just going to repeat it because this really is the quintessential piece when we're divulging how to look at time and attendance, how we're to look at the fully burdened labor, and how we're looking to get reimbursement. Because at the end of the day, the whole goal here is to have a bona fide agreement that could be recognized by whatever federal agency that's going to be regulating the money that flows down to the state at the state level, so that this way, when you put in for your reimbursement, you could get that maximum reimbursement effect. And Don talked about this in prior slides, anywhere from 75 to 25%. So Don, why don't you take it from there?
All right. So for most of the disasters that are declared for PA, which is the Public Assistance Program for local infrastructure and items such as that, the normal federal share is 75%. It's not less than 75% of eligible costs, and that's a big key, with the remaining 25%, which will be covered by local and state governments. Now, the key to this is many times for a brief period of time, the federal government may increase their portion of what they're going to pay. Generally, it's 90% they may increase it to, but on some occasions, such as in North Carolina, they have increased their share up to 100%. But the key is you have certain timelines to go ahead and get your contracts that you have paid off, submit for reimbursement during a certain period of time. Many times, local areas and localities, and this has happened also in North Carolina recently, they weren't able to meet the deadline where the federal government was paying 100% of all the eligible costs under there. So they ended up having to eat and absorb 25% of the cost because they did not have the contracts out, were not able to meet the specified requirements and paperwork in order to submit all the documentation in to get reimbursed for that. This is particularly true for emergency work. Specifically, the federal cost share may be increased, like I said, but it's only for limited periods of time. Examples of emergency work are law enforcement that you had to put out there, urban search and rescue teams to go ahead and rescue people, and debris removal. That's a big issue here, particularly on timeline for states, because in some cases, all this debris can't be removed on time. Yet, if you're still out there after the disaster hits, trying to get a negotiated contract, and all your vendors are tied up and they can't deliver, then you're going to have problems meeting all the deadlines. And that's why we're here to help you with some of that. Federal award funds are awarded after all the documentation is submitted correctly.
So we went into pre-position contracts, and that's really what that Don just referred to there, is making sure that everything is in a row so that vendors aren't tied up when you're trying to solicit them to get your business to respond to this disaster, and you're able to have those resources readily available because they're contractually obligated to perform said service. And in doing so, the services are procured which is the most important part, in accordance with the type of work eligibility that we're doing. This is what we previously discovered in the last session, session 5. So we're just recapping it real quickly because it really has a big emphasis on the fully breakdown, understanding why and how these things are categorized and what needs to be in there in order to provide that proper proof. As you see there, we're talking about right now that emergency work, that category A and B, which Don said, debris removal, your structures, your shelters, your congregate, non-congregate housing, your food, your emergency water, your emergency utility restoration, your emergency security, your search and rescue, the power restoration, any of that sort of stuff that falls underneath that category A. Which is category A and B, more specifically B, and then the emergency work compatibility of it. Then it walks into the permanent work. That's your long-term recovery stuff. That's repairing the road that got washed away. But more specifically, where this comes into play, and Doug's going to talk to this in a few minutes, is about your contracts, your invoices, your labor costs, your equipment costs, and your compliance. And those are areas that you're not going to be able to get away from. They're not just going to accept one item on an invoice that says manpower. They're going to want to see it detailed, broken out, so that they know that they're getting a most favorable value number. That it just doesn't say mobilization, and you have one big heaping number in that mobilization, because how do you know if that mobilization number is really justified? And that's really what this is all broken down for. So, as we said, documentation of the process. Completely, you have to start early. It has to be robust documentation. You have to have this before the disaster happens. Then you have to have the detailed cost tracking, the logs, the expenses. This is where we're going to talk later on about contractor pitfalls, how many of these contractors don't have the systems to support that, and neither do the state, local, federal, or state entities have those systems to properly track it. And you're trying to do this off of handwritten logbooks and stuff. It's just simply not going to work, and you're not going to meet those deadlines that were not met in North Carolina. Your personnel and equipment, tracking for hours. There has to be some intelligence-driven AI or some data that's enabling you to see how many people worked for how long, and said how many overtime, and what translates to this SCA, Service Contractor Act, and what's covered and what's not. Your contractor and your agreements, they have to be meticulous, very detailed, with bids, milestones, and what's eligible and what's not eligible. Some of the key strategies that we have here in structuring bid contracts for compliance and competitiveness. This is really, it's getting into that nuts and bolts of, okay, now I understand how vital this is. Well, how do I structure these contracts for competitiveness? Well, some of the strategies for contractors is you have to have proactive engagement with the contracting agencies to ensure and understand the evolving needs as they're happening. There has to be a mechanism for that. You also have to develop flexible pricing models, because situations could turn on a dime. You might go from as we were in Texas, we were originally contracted to just perform said services, emergency wraparound and guarding services in that Houston market, and then within a matter of 4 days it expanded to throughout the entire state. So you have to have that flexibility in your pricing model that can adapt those changing conditions. You have to have investment in technology, training to improve the efficiency and getting people out there in a rapid response. And you have to have strong supplier networks with ability for pricing and scalability. And then you have to stay informed of those federal mandates and the changes in the market trends as they pertain, so that you can pass along those best practices. That's the strategies on the contractor side, such as us. For the agency side, it's an entirely different host of things that you have to worry about. So for the agency side, you're looking at, you have to clearly articulate and describe the requirements and the desired outcomes in the solicitation. It's not a one size fits all. It's not, hey, we need a shelter, come erect the shelter. You'll see in there in a little bit just how many elements goes into erecting a shelter. It can't be, we need some guards, send some guards over. You will see exactly what goes into giving a guard in order to be compliant. These are elements that cannot be overlooked because they're going to be critical when Doge or whatever other entity is going to take that red pen and they're going to go line by line to see what you're eligible for. And if it's not there or can't be articulated in its entirety, they're going to redline it out and make you come back to them. And then if you come back to them after the period, you will not be honored and you will not get that 75 to 90 or more reimbursement. So you also have to utilize diverse pricing schedules and structures so that you can incentivize the performance and manage the cost. Whether there's a rapid response, so you have a first initial kicker of giving X amount for a mobilization if they're there within 48 hours, 72 hours, and then the prolonged period happens of payments, because no contractor, and this is what agencies have to prepare for, no contractor is going to say that they will do the work and wait for the check from the federal government to come. You're going to have to pay. They're not going to wait 120 days, 90 days to get paid, because the capital outlay and the capital investment is going to be so intensive. They have to foster, for agencies, you have to foster transparent communication and collaboration with all the contractors and all the local municipalities. Because remember, we talked about MOUs, and we talked about robbing from Peter to pay Paul, and borrowing from other entities and ones that you have compacts with. So I know that I could get 10 pieces of fire apparatus or 10 dump trucks from a certain township that's on the outskirts. These are things that have to be fostered beforehand. You have to conduct your due diligence on your contractor capabilities. That is huge. There is so many times that contractors are sitting there saying, yes, I have all this, I'm able to perform all this, and they're giving you a sweetheart price. And at the end of the day, when you're asking them to perform, they're first going out and trying to source the items or source the equipment or source the personnel. And what happens? That's leading to inflated prices that they have no other choice but to pass along to you. So you have to embrace that innovative practice of procurement measures that are able to ensure the value and the efficiency of what they plan on delivering. Doug?
Yeah, thank you. So negotiating favorable rates while maintaining quality, basically using the tools that you already have in your tool belt, so to speak. So when you're lining up your contracts, you can actually do the research and invite certain companies to bid. This way, you're not inundated with a bunch of smaller companies or people that just don't have the bandwidth or financial capabilities to actually perform the work. If you go for a public bid, then you have to decide how you're going to award this contract. Sole source, it's great, faster acquisition process. It's great when you only have one vendor that is truly qualified, and it ensures the continuity of service. That's your sole source. Now, a lot of these contracts end up becoming blanket purchase agreements. You determine 3 or 4 companies that have the potential to perform the service. And then when you have a call order in order to receive best pricing, you're going to get rates from those companies at the exact time. Firm fixed price is very challenging to adhere to in a contract like this because there are a lot of moving parts and variables. Cost reimbursement contracts, you have that as well. We kind of stay away from them only because it's not fair to you as the consumer. The other one that we really see a lot is the IDIQ, which is basically very similar to the blanket purchase agreement. It's not promising anything. It's one of those where you're good to go with that. You call up those people on the list and then they can basically perform. Now, when you're drawing up your RFP or RFQ, whichever mode you're going to use, you have to be very, very specific in what you need and what you require. If you require a 3-ton forklift, it needs to be very, very specific. From our experience, we've seen contractors which are compliant, but they try to cut corners whenever they can in order to get the job done. So you need to be absolutely clear in every manner of that RFP when it comes out, down to how many beds you need. If you're requiring certain sites, drainage, fencing, security, food, medical services, everything down to the T has to be included in that RFP. Otherwise, the contractors are going to either bill you more for the service when they find out later on, or depending on how bad the disaster is, those services may not be available later on in the game. Next slide, Joe. Thank you. So some of the things that you really need to pay attention to, we've seen it in the past 101 times. The requirements and planning, like again, exactly what you need. The companies that you're looking at, make sure that they have the finances. This is a huge outlay in costs when we go into any project like this. A lot of the companies will say yes, 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 and they'll be knocking at your door for an advance payment because they do not have the funds to actually finance just the initial setup and start. When we're dealing with this, government contracts, usually we're operating on a net 30. With that said, we're billing every 2 weeks. So we're looking at 45 days before we see any form of payment. So you need to have a good size treasure trust or at least a line of credit so that you can make those initial expenses. And you'll see during the RFP process, a lot of the companies, unfortunately, do not have the financial backing to make that initial layout. Other companies, they just don't have the experience. It sounds like a very easy job that any contractor can do. Unfortunately, when you get down there and your boots on the ground and you are planning the logistics of debris removal or even getting your people there or where you're going to set up, if it's a government contract, who's your local archaeologist that's going to do a site survey on where you're erecting any type of temporary structure. These are all things that need to be considered. Road closures, lack of adequate staff in the area due to the severity of the storm. We may have to bring in people from out of state, and those are all considerations that take place during the process. It's much better, and we operate much better when we actually have something in place and we know that there's an opportunity to come and assist in any type of disaster relief. Problem is, when we wait till the last minute, our resources are dwindled drastically. 2 days into the storm, we're already pretty much out there and we're already working, and it'll be much more of a challenge.
So
hold on one second, Don. Let me just clarify a point there. What Doug's referring to is that we're one of the larger players in this industry doing this type of work, and even our counterparts that are other large competitors in this industry that do a lot of work, we already have blanket pre-positioned contracts in place. So those are the ones that get filled first, and then after those get filled, any requests by the government will get filled, and by the federal government as part of a IDIQ or a GSA schedule award for a sole source award. And then you'll have situations where you'll get the off the cuff. So in a disaster, somebody calls a municipality and they're looking for help, or a government or state agency, and then they'll erect an emergency contract under a provision to then grant that and supply that contract. So if you're not in the queue of getting things done, that's what Doug's referring to. Then at the end of the day, you're gonna be piecing together several different contractors in order to fulfill an obligation, as opposed to being able to go to one contractor to get that done. I'm sorry, just want to make that priority point. Don, take it away.
Oh, thank you, Joe.
All right, contractual basis for compliance. One of the main items in a contract is your statement of work. And that is very important because that's the cornerstone of the contract. That is the nuts and bolts. It tells you in detail exactly what you are required to deliver on this particular contract. Now, for statement of works that are very vague, then the client does not get, or the state or the federal government does not get the services that they are expecting with that statement of work. That's why it has to be very detailed. And in that statement of work, for example, they want a vehicle. All right. Well, they have to specify exactly what type of vehicle they want, because pricing structures differ, and it might not be what the client is expecting to get. For instance, on a security guard contract, they want a roving patrol. How is that guard going to rove? Do they want a marked security vehicle? Do they want a golf cart? Do they want some other item? So the statement of work has to be very detailed. When you're talking about, for instance, armed guard or guards, security guards, do you want armed guards? Do you want unarmed guards? How do you want them to be on site? Exactly what hours do you anticipate the guards having to work? How many guards are you going to need at each site? All this stuff needs to be detailed in the contract and needs to be the cornerstone. If you got debris removal, how many tons of debris are you going to be removing? You need to estimate that out. What types of debris? Because different debris requires different reimbursement levels. So all this must be in the statement of work, which is the cornerstone of the contract. Deliverables are tangible items that must meet the requirements. So if the statement of work requires armed guards and you only have unarmed and you're putting them out, then you're going to be in violation of the statement of work and you're not going to meet the requirements. It's the same thing. If they are asking for instance, 2 guards per location and you're only able to supply 1 guard, are you meeting the statement of work minimum requirements of that contract? You're not. The contract will specify exactly what it wants delivered so that you have to remain in compliance with that part of the contract. Highlights that are pricing data is often other certified cost of pricing data requiring diligent analysis. Some of this, particularly when you are talking about reimbursements. For instance, they are asking for guards to be delivered. You look at your costs for the guards and you find out that you have travel costs involved. So you submit a line item saying, okay, I have, for instance, 30 hours of guard duty. I also have travel costs that are associated with the guard and per diem. So I'm going to bill that out as another line item, and you just bill it out. Well, under the federal contracting statutes, you cannot bill that out as just a general item. Say, for instance, I got $30,000 in guard costs, and I got $20,000 in travel costs to get the guards there and per diem. The federal government requires under FAR that you break all that down. Exactly what guard is being paid the per diem, exactly what travel costs did you incur? How did you pay the travel costs? Do you got receipts for all this? All that must be submitted with the proper documentation. It's the same thing. If you are, what are your costs for the vehicle? Is it going to be all inclusive? Have you negotiated with the government, for instance? Is it going to be for providing a security guard, a lump sum per day, which would be all inclusive of all your costs? You have to factor all that in because, of course, with vehicles, golf carts and all that, you have maintenance costs. You've got oil, you've got gas, you've got everything else. So you have to detail that down, and you've got to maintain spreadsheets on exactly what your costs are involved in that. The contractor's accounting for elements must directly align with the statement of work and support the fulfillment of everything that has been requested by the client. So in order to do that, you need to maintain detailed records, detailed spreadsheets. And that's something that we have experience in, that we have done over and over for the past 15 years of supporting FEMA in contracts. Go ahead, Joe.
So analyzing the contractor's cost, this is where to alleviate you of a little bit of sticker shock. So as you know, when the government funding is in play, contractors such as ourselves and other big players in the the field, we have to adhere to service contract agreement as well as the Davis-Bacon guidelines. Now, what these are is they set minimum pay rates that we're required to pay our officers. They're usually above market rate, not all the time, and it includes fringe benefits, vacation, sick time, and everything else. Now, depending on where and how severe the disaster is, a lot of times that we actually have to bring people from out of state because there are no available human resources, so to speak, in the area. With that, there are added costs such as travel, per diem, lodging, and a few other ancillary items as well. So those are all the things that when we're doing our workup, it's all going to be included: training, licensing, certifications, and on most government contracts, there's a very extensive vetting process for all the people that we're actually going to put on those sites as well. So that is all factored into usually an hourly cost. Now, that's not for the soft-sided structures and the debris removal. Those are all billed differently, but this is our basic workforce. What that would consist of is your electricians, your groundskeepers, your general laborers, your administrative staff. All are required to be paid a certain amount. Now, these are temporary projects. Now, the prevailing wages, sometimes we have to come in quite a bit higher because we're asking people to devote a substantial amount of time for a temporary job, and we really have to incentivize them to actually come and do the best job possible.
So as Doug mentioned, analyzing these contractor costs, there's 5 components of that. You have to look at the model for price realism. And what is the real actual cost? As Doug said, the labor, the fringe, the benefits, the taxes, the overhead, the payroll, and we're going to break that down for you in a minute. Then the statement of work. As the statement of work and the work performed in line, are they adhering to the statement of work regarding hours, wages? Don spoke to that in the prior slide. Then you take into effect things like breaks, lunches, non-guarding positions, your laborer positions, as Doug mentioned, your forklift operator, your debris removal operator. Those people, they're all fall underneath this SCA guidelines, and you have to pay them accordingly and make sure that they're getting all the fringe and the benefits and the breaks that they're supposed to be getting, in addition to anything that's on a state level. Then you have 4, you have to validate the other direct costs and the direct elements. If somebody's saying that there's a training buildup, or if they're doing something that requires an OSHA certification, or some type of insider threat training, or something of that nature. All these elements are elements that have to be billed for. As Doug said, travel if necessary, any lodging, per diem, anything that's over 50 miles generally necessitates a lodging or per diem. So these are things that, as we said, we have experience from having been allocated and contracted to perform a service in Houston recently, and then it blew out into the entire state. So the same pricing structure and model that we were originally procured services under, that had to be revisited, and we had the flexibility in the contract to do so. And that's why it was vital, and the mission was able to succeed without hitting any stalemates and wait for contractual or congressional approval. And then you have to, the last thing is, it was out, and I don't know if anybody caught on to it, but we reference the FAR clauses, and we reference, there's specifically right now FAR 15 403-B, -5B in subsection 2. And there's a couple more now that are particularly pertaining, and GSA and the contracting officers are really honing in on this to make sure that the vendors have a accountable payroll system and quality control system that is in line. We had to just submit all of our documentation to them to make sure that our systems and our back-end office staff and what systems that they utilize are in compliance with FAR clauses. So what does that mean? You get some of these, as Doug said, some of these smaller providers, and they say they could do the job, and they might very well be able to, but they don't have the office staff and the infrastructure. And so they're writing things on a napkin and trying to submit it to you on a napkin, and that just simply isn't going to work. So these are things that you have to take into effect and look at and make sure you notify. Don, red
Right,
flags.
identifying compliance gaps and red flags. Some of the discrepancies, for instance, between proposed hours and rates and the SOW labor category requirements. So they're going to be looking at this very closely, because many times in a contract, you're going to be tasked to deliver so many hours at certain locations at certain times. And then what happens is, when you don't provide that, then you have that discrepancy in the contract, and that issues a lot of red flags, either that you're a vendor that cannot provide the requirements that you said that you can provide, and then you cannot explain that out. Some of the other things are excessive overhead, G&A rates that do not correlate with direct costs. So many of the vendors come out here and think that, hey, this is a disaster. This is the federal government, or this is the state government. Hey, we could just go ahead and we can make all our money for the year on this one contract, and then they're billing out excessive overhead rates that they cannot justify. When you ask for a detailed breakdown on what their overhead is, that many times they do, then they can't justify it. For instance, even on a very simple thing like an hourly rate for a guard, actually, the federal government has that broken down, because they have it broken down in the hourly rate as, hey, this is what the standard rate is for the guards. This is what the federal government's required you to pay. But then you also have uniform costs. It's so much of that dollar rate goes to uniform costs, administrative costs, handling payroll, leave, fringe benefits, and all that. So all that is broken down, and if you bill that out excessively, you're going to have issues. It's going to create red flags for you in the contract, and it's going to delay payment to you, as well as a request for substantial additional information, not only on that particular invoice, but on all future invoices. Inclusion of costs of elements that are not directly supported by the SOW or task or deliverable. So you have to make sure that read exactly what the SOW is requiring you to do, what they're asking you to do, and what they're willing to pay for, and do not submit any additional costs that are going to be above that. Now, on some of that, you can include what your administrative costs are, such as we're a fairly large company that Joe and Doug have alluded to. We maintain a 24-hour operations center. So you can contact us at any time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, even on holidays, and you'll be able to get a response back. Some of the smaller companies that have taken on some of these tasks, you'll end up with a call directly to the owner of the company, who may be at dinner, and he'll look and scribble everything down on a note like Joe had talked about, and then he'll try to make some phone calls while he's at dinner to try to get the issue resolved. That's not the best way to go ahead and do business, and not a reliable system to go ahead and rely on for your contracting. You have missing or incomplete cost for mobilization, required support roles, or non-PSO roles. So some of the stuff that's very important, and like I alluded to earlier, when you have travel costs involved, and let's say the contract says, all right, we'll pay you an hourly rate, but then we'll reimburse you for travel. You're going to have to maintain detailed records of this, and you have to know exactly what the federal travel regulations specify, because they're only going to reimburse under what the regulations say. So you may have incurred costs of, let's say, $20,000, but if you cannot submit receipts, justification, who you paid it to, copies of checks or whatever, then you may not get reimbursed at all. Inconsistencies between worksheets. You submit a worksheet when you're doing the request for proposal. You submit a worksheet. These are what our costs are. This is what we are going to have. And then suddenly, when you are billing out, you have a totally different worksheet than what you submitted to them. That's going to create red flags, it's going to create gaps, and it's going to create compliance issues. Now, some of the things that are slightly different that Joe alluded to, for instance, you have a contract out. Well, suddenly they add a location that is not on the contract. Well, for you to provide services to that particular location, your costs are going to be significantly increased because there's not available manpower or equipment for that particular location. So you then submit to the contracting officer and say, hey, yes, we can do this, but our costs are going to be a little bit more, and you go ahead and you do a worksheet up for that particular area, and that way you are doing your pricing realism and you're taking into consideration everything that's required under there. So it's very important that you identify everything and you handle your gaps and all that so that you're not subject to all these additional requirements.
Now, this here is a great example of, for every project that we're going into, it's a real wage and cost analysis, and it's a solid breakdown on what a project is going to cost us. Now, for the temporary work, it's a little bit different because the hours are usually very not set in stone. They can fluctuate. The period of performance can fluctuate greatly. But as a general whole, for every position that we hire for, we are looking at the hours proposed, the pay rates, all our taxes, all the fringe benefits that we are required to pay. That includes their health and welfare. If it's a lengthy project, obviously we have to account for vacation, sick, jury duty, and of course, all the taxes. Next slide, Joe.
Well, when you look at, let me chime in on this for a second.
Okay.
When you're looking at this, you're looking at the weighted average of the wage rate and what that is. And the weighted average of the wage rate, that's when the contractor has to explain in great detail the basis for the computations in this text box that of what you're looking at here. That's the weighted average. How are they coming up with that fully burdened hourly rate? And if applicable, any of that equipment, as Don said, that should be lumped in there. What's the basis for the weighted average? Is it, your workers' comp, your general liability, included in the hourly rate? If you're requiring body armor, is the uniform, as Don said, a handgun or the ammunition or training, or if you're including training in there as it pertains, if they're a forklift operator, that they have to have their OSHA certification. All these things go into that weighted average, and you have to really be detailed when you're setting up these things. This is just how it's broken down even more, and Doug will explain the other direct element pricing.
So every one of them, it's broken down basically to the line item. Obviously, if there's heavy equipment involved, rentals, everything, that would all be included in this as well. But for this, we could see the training, the uniforms, body armors, weapons, ammunition, whatever the contract's requiring, we are going to break that down to our cost. This way, when you need a copy of our documentation to submit to the government, you're going to have it all, and there's going to be no questions, and they don't need to really review it because we have every line item broken down. When we actually get really into it, the fuel costs, the surcharges, wastewater removal, the site surveys, the engineers, everything will be a separate line item so that you can see exactly what your cost is at any given time. Certain things do fluctuate, obviously fuel costs and everything like that, so it's very hard to give a flat rate on those. But for the most part, once it's all said and done, you'll have a complete breakdown of every service that we offered and exactly what we did for that service and how much you were billed for it.
And you can see what the truly hourly rate is without the G&A, and then with the G&A and with the profit broken down into there. And that's how transparent it should be. And that's really how, if you're looking to have that continuity and ensure you're going to be reimbursed, this for any labor category, that's how it should be broken down. And
And the
Doug's
only
gonna
thing,
go into some
and the
other
only thing I want to
elements.
touch on with that is when you see that hourly wage category. So for some of these projects are long-term projects. They're a 4-year project, 5-year project. With that said, we are offsetting our costs over a period of 5 years. Now, unfortunately, when we come to the emergency service work, we are going to have to front end all our shipping costs, mobilization costs, and everything else in the front end. So there's really not a period for us to spread it out for any type of life cycle of a contract. It's going to be one quick hit on that one. And that's pretty much every contractor has to do the same thing because just the shipping and mobilization costs are usually quite high.
Things you don't think about normally, hourly costs, providing breaks. Everybody has to take a break, whether it's personal necessity. If in California, it's going to be state mandated breaks that you have to take, and or any other associated relief break cost. And does that mean that you want the equipment operator that's doing debris removal, when he's on break, he stops for that hour, or is somebody else supposed to jump in the hot seat and take over? Same thing for a guard. If you have a guard standing post at a shelter or a soft-sided facility that you erected, and he goes on break for an hour meal, is somebody supposed to cover that individual, or how are you handling that? These are all things that often go overlooked when you're not really looking at due diligence, and they create problems unforeseen, whether they be operational or cost problems. Doug, you want to talk through the other elements regarding the base and options and the pricing elements?
Sure. So basically, everything that we're trying to do is everything is broken down to the contract managers, your regional managers, your supervisors, your quality control people, your safety orders, officers, admin, everything. You will have a complete breakdown, as you should, from any contractor that you are going to choose, should and must give you a complete breakdown of every position, how many estimated hours, what exactly they'll be doing, what is their role, and what exactly are we billing you for. This is all the information you're going to need to submit in order to be reimbursed as well.
And for purposes of your submission and your cost breakdown, your worksheet, you have to do it in terms of for a price, for a model for a price realism. You have to do it based on full-time equivalents. This is because your labor costs, your fixed costs with your machines and stuff like that, and fuel, those are going to be pretty easy to guesstimate and get those in a close proximity. But your labor costs are really what's going to fluctuate depending on how much you need them and utilize them, as Don said. So for purposes of a worksheet that we've been going over and showing you, your full-time equivalents is basically your equivalent number of the employees on a full-time basis, plus the number of on a part-time basis converted to a full-time basis to staff the contract. So that means if you have 2 part-timers and they're each working 20 hours a week, and then that's converted to 1 FTE, 1 full-time equivalent. So for instance, for argument's sake, if you have 5,000 hours accorded for a particular position, on average, the annual productive hours of the full-time employee for that position is 1,800 hours. Or for example, roughly 2,080 hours, which less 80 hours for holidays and 160 hours for leave, less 40 hours for sick. These are all elements you have to take into effect. So the equivalent to the FTE to staff that labor category is calculated as 5,000 divided by 1,800, and that would give you 2.8 full-time equivalents. That's the level of detail that you need in order for reimbursement.
So these are wraparound services, and what the government does, as you may or may not know, is they break every position down and assign it a number, and that's where you're getting your pay rates from and what you need. With the wraparound services especially, you could have everything from your line cooks to your dining attendants, your maintenance crew, your truck drivers that are removing gray water and black water, porta potty services, everything else is all really dictated solidly by the government. So there's not too much variation in what they are going to be getting paid. Additionally, most of these services, if you are going to lodge people or have food and beverage, you also have to worry about your OSHA compliance. Everything needs to be followed very strictly. They will send people out on a regular basis to these sites to make sure that we're compliant on every aspect, whether it's having enough washing machines for the amount of people that we have, whether we have enough restrooms and showers for the amount of people that we're lodging, and plus all the safety issues as far as wires, our HVAC, our generators, and everything else. Everything needs to be 100% OSHA compliant. This is just a great listing of the things that we commonly see and we need. Once again, anytime that we're housing people, 100% needs to be OSHA compliant. With this said, when we're talking about specifics, you're talking about a dozer, which is a standard bulldozer. What size? How much dirt are we going to have to move? Because a lot of the contractors, if you say dozer, they will give you something right out of Home Depot that qualifies under the contract, but basically cannot do the job. So going back to when you're writing the actual RFP or RFQ, you need to be very, very specific in your needs, because contractors will, as we've seen in the past 100 times, do the exact bare minimum. If you need a 15-person stall for showers, you have to tell them it's a 15-person stall. Plastic tables, your soft-sided structure has to be graded to a certain level. It can't be one of the tents that you can pick up at any rental place. It needs to be something substantial. It needs to have base flooring. It needs to have electric. It needs to have HVAC. You need to have hot and cold running water. Anything that you could possibly think of, microwaves, televisions, all that needs to be in that initial RFP. That's how you're going to get the most realistic price, because once you start asking for things after the fact, the price unfortunately usually goes up because they're already in the process. Before anything happens, we usually can source this out and get more competitive rates. After a disaster, everyone is scrambling for the same resources, and there is definitely a premium on everything that we've seen.
So Doug, this is Don. I just want to
ahead.
interject on something as a perfect example of that, on what you're talking about. In Louisiana, shortly after COVID has started, they asked for wraparound services and tent housing for FEMA responders. They set up housing. They signed a contract, set up housing, and they were putting 6 to 12 FEMA employees inside a open air tent with bunk beds in it. What ended up happening was 50% or more of the staff ended up developing COVID in that environment where they're sleeping in the same sleeping area and all that. FEMA went back to the contractor, said we wanted individual tents, and they said you didn't specify that in the contract, that you wanted individual rooms for the people. So this is the way it went out. So you have to be very specific when you are asking for stuff so that it is included, what your intent is included in the statement of work on the contract. Thank you.
So as you see here, this is a 1,000-person PAX camp. It's a wraparound camp, a full wraparound camp with all the things that you would need in it. And then you can kind of use this as a model, if you screenshot it, to use it to expand it in quantities of 500 persons or more. And what you would need to build out a camp such as this nature. And you're looking at the number of rooms that they said they want for sleeping quarters, for work quarters, sleep tents, intake tents, processing, all of the washer dryers, how much footage and square footage that they need taken up. You'll see how this all plays out in an actual statement of work. Now, this is just used for a pricing sheet. This would not be the description of the statement of work. The statement of work would have each one of these items explicitly spelled out. For instance, eye wash stations, they want 16 eye wash stations. How do they want them? Where do they want them? What's the sanitary requirements there of them? How often they want the water changed out? How often they want the water brought in? That all needs to be filled out. It can't just be contractor dependent. So if you're looking on that sort of stuff, it is. So Doug, why don't you explain to them how we've seen some of these statements of work and how intricate they are, especially given the example of like lighting. Go ahead, Doug.
So every time that we see, especially when we're going into the temporary facilities, they're looking for a turnkey solution, someone to manage everything from procuring the plot of land, to having the engineers come out there for drainage. They want the fencing, they want the flooring, the tent set up, everything from soup to nuts, and then to maintain it. So usually, especially with your interior spaces, they do most of the time have partitions if it's required by the contract. If it's not required by the contract, they are not putting up those interior partitions. It'll be one big open area, and then they'll set up your air conditioning, your heating, depending on the time of the year, as well as restrooms, potable water, and those are your operational support services. There's a lot that goes in to it, as far as potable water removal, your utilities. When we have our generators, we have to have licensed HVAC technicians on site. We have to have people that can actually fix those generators, mechanics, in case something does go wrong. One of the harder areas is actually procuring the property, locating a suitable place to actually erect one of these structures. Once you have government funding, there's a lot of nuances that go in, as far as the engineers, the drainage. We actually have to have an architect come in, or I'm sorry, not an architect, an archaeologist come in to actually survey the land to make sure that we are not disturbing anything that may be culturally significant. And those are all dependent on the areas that we're working in. Some areas will require us to get permits, and we actually have to go to the local municipality, apply for the permits, and go through that process as well. Oftentimes for these, they do give us a waiver, but we cannot guarantee that that is going to happen. If they do require the permits, we are also looking at a much greater lead time unless we are prioritized. So these are all the little things that you actually have to consider even when you are looking to contracts. Past the BPA, what you have to do internally in your own organizations, in the towns, in the counties, in the parishes, the meetings that you have to have with them saying, listen, we understand that you're impacted. We want to do the best job as we possibly can for you. This is what we're going to need from you. You need to go and put this set of plans on top so that they can actually get taken care of very, very quickly. Most of them, they will tell us exactly about our LED light fixtures. They'll tell us how many looms each bulb should have. Most of these contracts are very, very, very specific. Some of the other areas that aren't considered and may not be in the contract, but we need to put them up, and we'll factor those in, and most companies will as well, is your admin areas. You're going to need areas to keep track of all this, storage areas. You're going to need offices. You're going to need your janitorial supply lockers, along with your listing of what chemicals you're using at each site. For the equipment, basic equipment that we need just to come in and set something like this up. We need the heavy machinery. We need to grade the land. We need to put some form of surface down, usually crushed rock. We're usually not asphalting anything, but we have to make sure that the drainage is correct. What happens if we do get rain? What happens if there is additional flooding? Is this camp going to be washed out? These are all the things that we have to concern ourselves before we even look at breaking a ground. That's before one shovel goes in the ground. Additionally, the generators. How big is the camp? How many generators do we need? How are we taking care of the people that are working there? Do we want them in with the survivors, or do we want to make sure that they have their own camp? Are we putting up emergency service workers? Are we putting up FEMA? Are we putting up state police? What about the search and rescue people? How many additional people are we going to be putting up other than the main clientele, which is usually the survivor services? The water and the potable water delivery and the wastewater removal, always a challenge. Every area is different. So those are all the things that we have to consider. And if we are going into the debris removal, where are we taking the debris? Does the state have somewhere already lined up, or are we looking for an area to facilitate a way station of sorts? So these are all the things that have additional costs that people don't realize are there, but they're absolutely unavoidable.
So when you're looking at these things and you're looking at a temporary, permanent structure or a soft-sided structure, you'll see here, this is a traditional scope of work laid out on everything that is there. The contractor shall provide all material, supervision, labor, equipment, and services to provide turnkey solution for the setup, operation, removal of a temporary facility. And then it will lay out what do they mean in terms of what the capacity is that they're looking to hold and how many staffers and personnel and visitors and survivors. Then you'll get into your temporary facility and you'll get into the breakdown of each component of the temporary facility. And then you'll get into your utilities, which is always a bear because they start getting into EPA regulations and OSHA regulations, your generators, trash removal. So this could be very, very labor intensive if you don't have the right elements in there to try and walk back and get certification and approval therefrom. That's why in all of these different webinar series, we stress the importance of these pre-position contracts. If you have all these in place, we could sit down with you in the beginning, craft these documents, craft these statements of work, get them out there so that you get the right people and the right stuff in place. And that's why Don alluded to in a lot of the other sessions about consulting. Generally, it's very hard to find subject matter experts or a significant amount of ones that have the expertise in all these different areas, whether they be a structural shelters or any type of emergency wraparound services or in guarding, and then coming up with a master service agreement that handles all of these things and identifies activation levels where you would do certain elements of these things and you would be contractually obligated and with certain breakpoints for those activation levels depending on storm and impact analysis. So these are all areas that we can sit down and help you with from a consulting perspective or from a contractor perspective or from both. Some of the key strategies and the examples of a disaster response contract, a navigating one. So the scenario, a major disaster with requiring debris removal and temporary housing. You have to balance the rapid deployment needs with cost control. That's always a pricing challenge. Then if you want to utilize a T&M style contract, which a lot of general contractors will try and utilize, a T&M style contract that's time and material, with specific pre-negotiated rates and strict oversight. That's the vital necessity. There has to be the pre-negotiated rates and the strict oversight and the accountability of tracking of that so that they could submit and supplied and supplemental unit pricing that mirrors the task element. And then from there, and the task elements, let me walk that back for a minute. As we've had many times from many state agencies, the task orders come over in a separate, almost like addendum to the contract, and they come over weekly or daily, and basically that's met on the evolving landscape and the evolving needs as things are developing, where our executive leadership is meeting with yours or the state EOC director or FEMA or the entities that's in charge, and you're looking at the landscape and you're saying, okay, well, we have significant flooding, we have power restored over here, so the focus should be over here. We're able to broadcast communication and get messages out to stop mass hysteria. So this section's good, so we're going to shift resources to this section so that they see people and they see stuff's going on because there's no communication there. So these are things that you have to take into consideration. And like we talked about in prior webinar series, utilization of cows, cellular on wheels deployment units, and we have those as well, where you roll them in. They're like trailers, and they'll set up a bridge or a mesh network for people for your entity or your governmental, local, state, or federal to then put out something on social media. So at least some information is getting out there. Obviously, with the preference of social media nowadays, that's a great way to get out mass notification to people so that they understand. And as the success factors in this scenario is they had detailed logs, clear communication channels, and prompt invoice submission. It wasn't somebody in the field that was, as Don said, the owner and the operator. So he had nobody tallying the records. So at the end of the day, that proved to be very challenging. So with this type of deployment, you're able to then take what somebody's done in the field, it electronically gets transferred to the back office, and then it gets calculated and validated against the statement of work, so that when the submission happens, it can almost be submitted on a weekly basis, so that you can ensure when those milestones are met, your submission deadlines are on target and on point. You're not trying to get anything. So the key takeaways from all this, and I see we had a couple of people jumped in at the end, and if you're looking for any of this, please feel free to contact us. We'll send you a link to the webinar so that you're able to see the whole thing in its entirety. And there was a lot of great, useful, impactful information, because we really ripped apart the number, and we really ripped it apart from a granular perspective so you could structure your contracts and your bids efficiently. Looking at this, proactive planning is paramount. That you can't wait for a disaster to start preparing financially. It's just not going to work out for you. Knowing your guidelines, you have to understand the state and federal entity and the eligibility criteria. You have to document everything. Documenting everything is key. Meticulous record keeping is a non-negotiable for reimbursement. That's the mindset that you have to go into this. Everything is a non-negotiable. I don't care if I moved this pen from here to there. I want an invoice and I want to know how much it cost me, because you have to make sure you document everything. Leverage pre-positioned contracts, and we can't stress this enough. We stress it throughout the entire 6-part webinar series, and we're going to be posting them all and sending them all a link out on our social media as well, so that anybody can access them. You have to make sure you're securing those critical resources and you're getting favorable terms in advance. If you're waiting for the disaster to happen, you're going to get price gouged. There's no other way around it. And then continuous improvement. This is not a shelf policy. You can't set it and forget it and put it on the shelf. You have to have some type of built into your master service agreement, some type of regular meeting and strategy with updating plans, updating policies, updating contracts. As the county, local, state, or federal municipalities have implemented mitigation strategies, whether they be dams or erosion techniques. These things then will impact the emergency response. So your plan has to be updated. You have to constantly talk about your mass distribution for communication networks and your MOUs. And as municipalities that you have MOUs with have inoperable equipment, you have to update your plan, because when you're pushing the panic button and you're relying on 3 payloaders from the Department of Transportation in the neighboring county and you don't get them, what do? So these are things that you have to take into consideration, and you have to have that continuous improvement for your policies, your plans, and your contracts. At this point right now, we'll take any questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the Q&A. And if you do, we'd be more than glad to have them. If not, in the Q&A feature pinned to the top, there is a great section that talks about links and resources. You have free tools, which is a hazard vulnerability analysis, a great tool. It's free that we give to you to perform and look at your municipalities. You have information on pre-position contracts. And then you have a whole bunch of capability statements and fees and everything else that go into there. And contracting vehicles, as well as links to a lot of social media where we put out a lot of best practices and values on this, that I continue to stay engaged, because we're learning every day. Just like you're learning every day, we're doing the same thing. And we're learning how to retool this, and so that we could deliver better value to our customers and ensure people's lives and ensure your continuity of operations, as well as your favorability with your local constituents. Our emails are up there. jsorty@sscctu.com for myself, dgossage@sscctu.com for Don, and Doug Rule at drule@sscctu.com should you have any questions. All right. See no questions. I guess we did a good job. I appreciate everything. Thank you for joining us for this 6-part webinar series, and we'll stay tuned for any future ones that we throw out. And we look forward to hearing from you and seeing how we can help. Stay close and stay prepared for this upcoming holiday season. And remember, it's better to prepare for a crisis than have to suffer from one.